Controlled Chaos here. Today, I have a great thing for you guys. I am interviewing Johnny Owl, a developer for Stars Reach. How are you doing today, Johnny?
Doing good. Feeling very cozy right now.
That's always great, you know. First thing I want to know is how did you get into the video game industry? What was sort of like your first job that was in the industry?
My first job that was properly in the industry was probably with Neversoft. I had been working at a boutique effects studio before that, and I got burnt out there.
Mhm.
They did a little bit of like contract work for other studios, you know, for film, TV, and video games. So I did video games sort of like indirectly. But anyways, I took a little break after that, and then found myself, looking for a job in the video game industry, and never really thought that I would get a job in the industry because I don't know, it just seems really unattainable. Um, for instance, one of the places that I interviewed at, they only hired art center grads, and it's like I have no art background, so
Mhm.
I wasn't even sure why they were interviewing me. But yeah, eventually I landed at Neversoft, and I was there for a good long time. And that was my only other major video game company that I've worked for. If you can call Playable Worlds major. I mean, they're working on something big, but it's a small team.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's a small team with big names behind it.
yes, we've got a lot of veterans of the industry and of the genre on the team. And few fresher faces as well. But yeah, it's funny because I know these people from the games that they make, and not necessarily the people.
Mhm.
For instance, Dave Jorson, he worked on Tribes way back when, and I didn't find that out until after I'd worked with him here for a little while when skiing came up.
Uh-huh.
Um, and what's funny about skiing actually is I just saw skiing in our game recently during a play test, and it's like in my mind that's like a Dave Georgeson special.
Yeah, I actually, the funny thing is I was in the game yesterday, getting background footage for this interview, and a group had made a ski jump to see how high up in the sky they could jump. And I was actually playing around with that and having fun and stuff like that. And that's some of the things that I like about Stars Reach is it's not your MMO theme park setup. It's a sandbox. So you create your own fun in wherever you do. And that's really great. And I like that. But I want to move on and what is your title and job position in Stars Reach?
I'm the principal VFX artist, um, but I'm also the only VFX artist. So I handle all the particle effects, so all the explosions, boomy stuff, sparkly stuff, and also more of the mundane things that people don't always pay attention to, but it's all part of the world. Um, because we're also a very small company, I also help out with the lighting
Mhm.
when I need to. Um, yeah,
Okay, so when you're saying like the particle effects, we're talking like when you shoot the Omni Blaster, that bolt that shoots out, things like that.
right. So yeah, all the weapon effects like the projectiles that you talked
Mhm.
about, But also, if you ever see the birds flying in the sky, that's visual effects as well.
Yeah.
And then there's mundane things like when you select a fabricator piece, there's a little outline on it. That's me. Um, yeah, so VFX, it kind of touches almost every single part of the game experience from a player view.
Yeah.
Some of it's really in your face, some of it not so much. Um, it's sometimes very, very hard to define VFX, especially at a larger company where it might be separated into visual effects and technical art. Being that we don't have a technical artist on the team, I do some of that work as well. Um, so yeah, it gets a little bit blurry. I guess it's pretty fair to say that I've got my grubby fingers on a lot of different parts of the game.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. When you work at those big companies, like you said, they finite down to where you have your texture artists, where all that they do is they just work on all of the 2D art things. Then you have your 3D mauler, then you'll have like a rigger, then you'll have like a skinner, then you'll have animators. At small companies like Playable Worlds, because it's almost the size it is the size of an indie company. Your 3D mauler also has to be the rigger, the skinner, the animator. Your 2D artist needs to be able to handle multiple types of 2D and maybe even some particle effects, because there is that blur line there of, oh, I need to create a fire effect. Well, you need to have a 2D artist create the visual effect that fire is going to show, in some cases, depending on the particle system you're using in the game engine. So that's very important. And, like you said, visual effects go across the board, because you'll have visual effects that happen in the user interface of putting a globe maybe around a button when you click on it or hover over it. Like we mentioned, the Omni Blaster and that the build area we have for homesteads, that box that has the glow and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure you had a hand in on that, because that's a visual effect type thing. You
Yes,
know,
that's actually a pain point for me right now because when I was working on that particular effect, we hadn't anticipated. Originally, that effect was supposed to be only visible when you're right up against the homestead, not from
mhm,
far away. But by default now, you can see it from clear across the map. And when you're that far away, you see the entirety of the effect, and you can see the way that it tiles around the cube,
mhm.
which was never intended because the way it tiles around that cube, in my eyes, is pretty ugly. So it's one of those things that it's on my list of things to fix when I have more time.
Yeah.
But just to clarify one point you made, I don't touch any of the 2D stuff. Yvette is our UI person,
Mhm.
and like the glows around the buttons and so forth, she handles that.
Okay.
And Sean probably helps with that as well at some point. But anyways, yeah. Um, but we do have to stretch the boundaries of what our job title says about us, just to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and that's sort of, it's nice because then you get to work on multiple different skills and maybe even learn a
Yep.
new skill or a new program that you haven't touched before, because different companies use different programs. Just like with, 3D modeling, you got 3ds Max, you got Blender, you got Maya, and many more 3D modeling programs. And just having to learn something that you're not used to using and stuff like that. And especially in Playable Worlds, where you guys are building so many internal tools to handle things, you're having to learn those internal tools too, or even build them. And, with this game being in pre alpha, like you mentioned, with you not being happy with how that box shows around the homestead, to me right now, that doesn't bother me because I know it's pre-alpha. A lot of the art's just sort of placeholder there to give something visual, and you guys are working on it and fine tuning it, and you honestly don't see those errors until it's actually in the game. And so you don't know what you can fix until that's done. And then you got to prioritize what's more important. And so
Sure.
with that, are you literally given a priority of what to fix on, or are you sort of left to your own to figure out what you need to fix when given issues?
Um, yeah, we have a priority list, for like our next build. We know the features that we're trying to get in. And so everybody has their list of tasks to kind of make that new feature as awesome as possible, especially on first release. So, on my end, what visual effects is going to support that new gameplay feature or an update. Um, but when there's some downtime or when I've hit all those important tasks to support that release, then I can sneak away and go through my backlog and work on things that are still important, but not as important
Mhm.
as that next release. Um, but really, in a studio this small, you're a lot of times you're left to your own devices, and you kind of need to figure out what you need to be working on. You can't always rely on people telling you, you know, what you should be working on today. You should have a good idea of that, and if you don't, then you need to find out. There's a lot more onus on you to kind of own your own work and kind of be responsible and make that contribution towards that next release.
Yeah, and you are right about that because I have worked for big companies. I have worked for small companies in the game industry, and the bigger companies sort of okay. Here's your list of what you need to do today, and then the smaller companies are like, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what's important needs to be done first, and then once you get all that done, you sort of get that free reign, and that's really nice. Now, what I want to know is what programs do you use when you're creating some of the artwork for the visual effects that you do? Is it Photoshop? Is it, some other program that you use for your artwork?
Sure. Most of the textures I'm doing right now are in Substance Designer. Um, and one reason for that is a lot of the visual effects are um, they're not very painterly and they're not very realistic.
Hmm.
So if it was like something really realistic, like even the smoke and flames and like that, it's pretty stylized. So most of that is hand drawn
Hmm.
in Photoshop, but the other stuff like trails on the projectiles, that is designer. Um, in a more traditional, realistic game, I would be rendering out smoke and fire.
Hmm.
Um, but that's not the type of game we're making. So yeah, so mostly I'd say like 90% of it is in designer. Um, the rest of it is either cleaned up in Photoshop or just done in Photoshop. Kind of depends.
Okay, so now with you saying that you're using Subsurface Designer, I know that Unity can handle Subsurface Designer files so that randomly generates the texture based on the parameters that you gave it. And because I have a game in the future that I'm planning on using that kind of thing, because I need the bricks for doing. Each brick needs to have its own texture to it and look different from the one next to it. So are you taking the actual substance file and putting it into the game, or are you guys rendering that out as like a PNG or something like that?
Yeah, we're rendering it out as just a regular texture file. We're
Okay.
not using the source substance. And if we use the substance file, that there's an overhead to that,
Mhm.
and I don't think we're willing to pay the cost of that.
Yeah.
Um, I think we did look into integrating some of the substance workflow a while back. But as far as I know, we're not using it right now. And that was on the environment and character side.
Yeah.
Um, I think for the environment art and for the character art, we ended up just having a, well, what do you call it? A specific output format um, in Designer that outputs the texture with the different layers and the different channels that we need for our custom shader.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. The only time I would touch that is if I wanted to give a specific material some kind of effect treatment. So I would modify the material or the textures.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to go in, you have to play with like the spectral map or the alpha map and things like that, get the look that you're going for. So if you got something that you want to have sort of like a more metal shine to, you deal with the specular map and stuff like that. You know, I find that
Right.
sort of fun to do, but also very painstaking to make sure you're keeping within the confines of the art style you're going with. Because, like you said, Stars Reach isn't going for a full realistic look, but it's also not going with a total cartoony look, hand painted look. It's sort of in between. And I personally, I like that art style. I find it very fun to play in and mess around with. Now, when you actually create these particle effects, are you using like the Unity engine and using a particle emitter to create some of these effects, or are you pre-rendering out some of these animations and then having it just show in game?
No, 99% of the effects are in the visual effects graph. So it's, the built into Unity. The other 1% is in Shuriken, which is the older particle engine in Unity.
Yeah.
For the most part, I'm not rendering out anything and importing a flipbook. Trying to think if there are any exceptions to that. There's right now. As far as I can remember, I'm not using any kind of flipbook, but I am using um, like procedurally animated textures. In other words, the shader is doing the texture animation
Mm-hmm.
rather than it being baked in. Um, and yeah, there's like with the particle effects, there's a lot of custom shader work that kind of works together with the particle systems
Mm-hmm.
get to give any given look or effect that I want.
Okay, yeah, I honestly I like the fact that you're using more of the particle system in the engine, because then every time that particle happens or that effect happens, it's a little bit different. It's not the same every single time. Whereas if you use, like you said, a flip book, people get used to sort of the rotation of what shows up and you're more limited. Whereas if you're using the actual particle engine, like you said, you're using a bit of a Shuriken, which is the older version of the particle system Unity used to have, and stuff like that. That still was better than having a flip book. And then you also said that 99% of the time you're using the new particle system that Unity. And I personally haven't had a chance to play around with the new system. So what I'm wanting to sort of know as a designer myself, how is that new system in Unity?
It's good once you get used to it. Organ like the way that you organize a complex effect kind of is terrible because it is kind of graph based and you've got all these lines going all over your screens. Past a certain point of complexity, it just becomes spaghetti and very hard to navigate. Now, what you can output from that is usually very good and very flexible. So on the whole, it's a good tool. There's been a couple of cases where once you get into the nitty gritties of it, there's some bugs here or incompatibilities here that just don't make any sense from an end user standpoint. One example would be like the inability to spawn lights from the visual effects graph, which you can do in Shuriken. So I had like I had the little dragonflies working in the visual effects graph, and it worked well in the visual effects graph. And then someone had the bright idea of, well, there should be a light on these little these bugs, but you can't do that in the visual effects graph. So I had to port the whole thing over to the Shuriken, and then Shuriken again, it works with it allowed me to add a light, but then there was something with like it can't. So with the dragonflies, as they're flying around, there's a little trail of sparks.
Yeah.
Initially, that was kind of two separate systems. The dragonfly is one effect, and as it's moving, it automatically emits those little sparkles. That works fine in visual effects graph, but you take it over to Shuriken and you can't have a particle effect spawn another particle effect. So I had to figure out a different way of getting that trail of sparks behind the dragonflies. So it was sort of like I had two different particle systems. They don't really work well together, and neither one of them did exactly what I wanted to without a lot of elbow grease. And I mean, in the end, I got it to work in Shuriken, but there were a few headaches with that.
Well, yeah, and that can happen, but I'm pretty sure you felt good about yourself once you actually got it to work. I mean, yeah, it was a pain and a headache, but once it was done, you're like, oh yes, it looks good. It's there. And I like the fact that, those dragonflies that you have in there, I see them. They catch my eye when they go by because of the slight glow effect they have and that particle trail that they leave. I think that's really nice work that you've done just in that. It adds some liveliness to the world.
Yeah, I really enjoy adding ambient effects. into the world, whether it's fauna or just ambient dust, or I don't know, little tiny bits. Like there's so much I want to add just to liven the world up.
Hmm.
But it's a matter of time and getting some of the other systems in place so I can do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
even uh, even like a desert landscape has a lot of things going on. It's not static. Like sand isn't static. Yeah, nothing is really static. There's always something going on.
yeah, definitely. And well, the great thing about this is it's an MMO. So the work's not done when the game releases, like you get with single player games or even some of these multiplayer games that you have, where they do all the work, then they release it, and then they might do some updates and stuff like that. With MMOs, you constantly get to add more after release. And
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that's something that sort of excites you, that, you're not feeling that pressure of, or that disappointment of, oh, I wasn't able to get this system in or exactly the way I want it. You can tweak those things later on or add in what you were hoping to add in.
Yep. Yep. That is the hope, that we have a long shelf life and we can keep updating it.
Yeah,
Um, you
I'm
know,
hoping the same thing.
yeah. Right now we're trying to get all the foundations, all the bones in there so that there's enough um, art to support the gameplay to make it a cool world. But we definitely want to do a lot more with it once we get to that release date.
Yeah, and that's gonna be fun to see what the game's like at launch and what you guys add in after the fact. And what I'm wanting to
Yep.
know is, what's something that you really enjoyed making and like that's in the game now?
Oh, fun one was just adding all the lights to the beam weapons. Um, we switched from forward rendering to deferred rendering, and all of a sudden it was like this capability opened up to add, tons and tons of lights. Typically when you have a beam weapon, you probably have just one light at the beginning of the beam and then another light at the end of the beam.
Hmm.
But what we're doing is we're dynamically generating point lights along that beam uh, to give it more, to give the more light more volume.
Hmm.
Because we don't have a good GI solution. I think someone on Discord mentioned ray tracing. I'm like, holy moly, I can't even think about ray tracing in a game like this. Like in like a traditional MMO, you would probably be doing some kind of a light map solution, and that's where you get all your nice, bounce light and soft shadows, and um, but we don't have that. So I think one of the most satisfying things just with that with lighting was just the beam lights. As soon as we got that working, it's like the the beams felt like they're in the world rather than kind of pasted in. Um, and anytime I see people cross the beams in game, especially with like the different colors in a cave,
Hmm.
it looks so pretty.
Yeah, it
So
does.
that was fun.
And something you mentioned about someone bringing up in Discord ray tracing, you're like, I didn't even think about that. I noticed the same thing happens to me. And what I noticed there is you're really close to the project and working on it, that you almost sort of sometimes get tunnel vision when working on something. You're not able to fully think outside the box and recognize that. I know when I was working on doing a early pre-alpha of my game Marpingo, it's a mix between miniature golf and pinball, and we had this sort of like uh horizontal bar to pull for power to shoot the ball. And a player came up and goes, "You need to make that vertical so it feels like a pinball plunger." And me and the programmer just looked at each other and went, "Why didn't we think of that? That's brilliant. Come back tomorrow. We'll
Yep.
have a representation of it then." So I
Yeah.
totally understand what you're talking about there. Now, what's something you're really excited to work on uh visual effects wise for the game before it releases?
Um, all the ambient and environmental effects. We've got a little bit of ambient fauna with the birds and the
Mm.
dragonflies, but there should be tons of like variety based on the type of environment you're in, the season you're in. Um, and then even the flora, there should be falling leaves in the fall. um, there needs to be dust and ice storms and just like things to really bring to life the environment so that even when you're standing still or sitting down in your homestead and looking around, there's just stuff happening. um, that makes the world feel real, and it makes the world just neat. um, so once I get a chance to do that, I'm gonna go hog wild on it as much as they'll let me, right?
Yeah.
Because
Definitely understandable. So you really gotta be excited for the season's part two where they're adding in the rain and the snow. You're really gonna be able to work, you're probably already working on that part right now for the particle effects system, right?
well, this the season's part two, the rain and the snow, is just a initial implementation. Um, there's a lot that goes with rain and snow that's not going to be in this kind of initial iteration. But yes, rain and snow is awesome, because you start thinking about wet surfaces and puddles and snow and snow around things, snow melting. But that's a future thing.
Yeah.
And if and when we can get that working, that'll be pretty awesome. Um, we did some prototypes way back, way back when, in terms of making things wet and covered with snow and so on. So I don't think we'll get all of that in right away. But it's on our mind, and it's something I look forward to.
Mm. One thing I just sort of want to bring up is the fact of how you're looking at these seasons in more than just the rain and the snow. The fact that you mentioned like fall, the leaves falling, and having that kind of particle effect of it falling off the tree. That would look so cool in the game because the seasons go through, and just seeing what we have now with the landscape and the trees losing their trees, seeing as those leaves are less and less on top of the tree and they're actually just sort of falling, adding just that simple little particle effect really adds into that whole entire living world you guys are all working on, which is it's the small things like that that really add in immersion and drag you into the game. And so the work that you do is very important to bring that immersion and to capture that player, and it also gives that, ooh, this looks nice, this looks pretty fact. And so I appreciate the work that you put into stuff like
Yeah, thanks. But even like with the trees, it's I do a small part of it.
that. Yeah.
It's well the it starts in environment art. They build the trees, and then I just find ways of making them a little bit sparklier or cooler. but if the base tree asset wasn't there, then I wouldn't have anything to work on.
Yeah.
So that's a shout out to the environment artists.
Well, and that's the great thing is, just like we wouldn't have games if we didn't have some of these programmers. It would just
Yep.
be a movie. You need those programmers to make the games. You need to have the animators have the 3D models move. You need to have the texture artists to add in the different textures, whether it be leather, metal, dirt, or whatever, to the world. And it's everyone working together that's really nice. And I've talking to many of the different developers in the discords, and all seem to have a passion for this project and really enjoy working on this. And that's got to be just something nice that you're working at a place that you're enjoying the job. Am I
Yeah.
right on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I count myself lucky to be in that kind of position. You know, you don't, not everyone gets to do what they like to do and get paid for it
Mm-hmm.
and have a workplace that they enjoy being a part of. It's a little strange to say that because we are a remote studio, and I think everyone enjoys it being a remote studio, but even so, that there is a feeling of what the studio feels like with the people in it, even remotely. You know, it, and if I didn't work with people that I enjoyed working with, even from arm's length, then it wouldn't be a fun job. Um, yeah, we do miss not having like a central place to gather sometimes, though.
Yeah, I mean that
So
can be fun, especially in the game industry where there's pranks and fun, and it's more of a relaxed work environment in the games industry than most places, and I
if you're
really like
lucky,
that.
yeah.
Now I want to move on to more of talking about Stars Reach, and I want to know what's your favorite thing to do in Stars Reach. Building? Is it mining? Is it the combat? Is it just exploring? What do you enjoy and love doing the most?
That kind of changes from day to day. Recently, I've started to get into building,
Mm-hmm.
which normally I don't really enjoy. Just because it's usually not my forte, but I've seen some of the other things that playtesters have been building, and I've been inspired. So I do pull out my fabricator and my Instaformer and have a go at it. Um, so yeah, lately that's what I've been doing most of. Before that, I like digging and mining. It's I don't know what it is, but just digging holes is fun. Plus, I get to see all the cool light beams and stuff in the
Yeah.
diggity holes. Um, yeah, and I expect this will change just depending on where I'm at. There's so many different things you can be doing. Uh, that yeah, once we get more game systems in, I'm sure I'll spend some more time doing that, whatever the next new thing is.
I think what makes the digging and mining in Stars Reach so fun is the fact that you're digging in and you're able to use the prospecting to find the exact material you want. You have to actually dig into the ground, unlike No Man's Sky, where it's like, oh, you're looking for copper, just look above the ground, there's your copper. This one, you have to dig in deep sometimes to get to those resources. As you're doing that, don't know if you're going to run across lava. You don't know if you're going to run across water. You don't know if you're going to run across sand on top of you and falling down on you. And then other things like that. Like in the future, it could be that you accidentally hit an internal cave system and there's creatures in there or something like that. It's the unknown for that digging process. Whereas if you look at every other MMO, when you go to do the mining, it's, oh, there's a node here. The only thing you have to worry about is the mobs around. Everything else is perfectly fine. That's what entices me about the digging. And then also, like you said, the particle effects you've done for the terraforming beam is really nice and just adds to that feel. It fits in with the world so nicely, and I appreciate that work that you put into it. So, with that said, what's one gameplay mechanic you like? You're waiting to see in the game that you want to play around with?
Just one.
I know it's a hard
what-
choice because there's several on my list I'm waiting to see.
yeah, yeah. Gosh. If you asked me 2 days ago, it would have been something else. But right now, I've got spaceships on the brain, so
Yeah.
I want spaceships. Yeah. Uh, it's also a little bit different, right? When I say I want spaceships, like, yes, I want to fly around in my own custom ship and be a smuggler or whatever, but I also want to work on spaceship effects. so,
Like the
so
afterburners, the
yep,
different laser beams and stuff like that. Yeah, that can be really fun, especially playing around with the afterburners and being a sci-fi game. You're not just the regular flames. You can be really creative in how you create those particle effects and trails.
yep,
So that's where
exactly.
your creative mind probably is just exploring so many options.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And then when you get into spaceships too, and it's also figuring out all the little things that happen on a spaceship aside from the afterburners that make them cool. Um, but I haven't spent too much time like um, for instance, airlocks, right?
Yeah.
The like airlocks open, you get air blowing out, little things like that. It just be fun to work on. Or if you're in your spacesuit, just finding like little bits of detail that really kind of like add interest, to a spacesuit. Like we have little thrusters on them right now, but we can do more. So so yeah, I think generally I'm just waiting for spaceships. Whenever Dave gives the go ahead to work on that, that'd be really fun.
Well, and that's the great thing. Like I keep on bringing up, a lot of the work you do and what you're interested in doing, the particle effect systems, is all of the environmental stuff and things like that. And like I've said before, it's all immersion. And immersion brings you into the game and feel like you're in that. When I play City Heroes, the way they've done the particle effects in that and stuff like that, it's doesn't stand out. I mean, it's like if you were to have a game where part of the textures are real textures, the other part are cartoony textures, and other textures that are, you know, hand paint textures. That to me sort of breaks and make everything fit together. That's when you get that you're playing a game and you're just enjoying your time and enjoying the visual effects that are happening in front of your eyes. And so the
Yeah,
fact that you really focus on those small little details is nice because it adds more.
yeah. It's always like you don't always see the small things, but when you do, it's like awesome. It's like a little happy surprise.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
finding Waldo.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
you can. That's the great thing about that is look at a picture. You can take a picture of what you've done in game. Every time you look at, it, you see different details in that picture. You recognize something new in that picture, and that's enjoyable fact of that in itself. And I really like that, and the fact that you'll be adding more with it being an MMO after the fact. Could be that like in No Man's Sky, you can customize the jet trails from your jetpacks or your spaceship. I'm pretty sure in the future, Stars Reach may end up doing something along the same lines, and that just keeps on adding you in more work for you to do, but also being able to be creative and have fun with it to do things like it could be that maybe Dave or Raph just come up to you with a theme of like music. Okay, make us a music inspired trail for this, and then let you loose on something like that, and then you get to go creative. Is that the direction that they pretty much take when giving you a assignment of okay, we want you to do this, and then they give you the broad strokes and let you be creative, or sometimes more defined of we need exactly this and this exactly what.
It's usually broadly defined, but it's kind of unspoken that it has to fit in the existing art style and the existing universe.
Yeah.
There are requirements, for example, how big it needs to be, or how fast it's going to go, or how long it's going to last, that kind of thing. But visually, they're pretty open-minded. Same with Magnus. But ultimately, um, they have uh, the the thumbs up or thumbs down, right? If I go off in the wrong direction, they'll let me know. But they're pretty open-minded usually.
Well, and that's a good
And
thing that they're open minded because then there's that compromise back and forth to make it look just right. They're letting you your creativity and your artistry to make it, but make sure it fits in with what they're doing. Because if it doesn't fit in, it's one of those things like I'm coming back to immersion. Immersion, and by just wanting to do those little details to add immersion, you're just naturally, going okay. I need to make it this art style so it fits in, but that you get the creativity to sort of play around with it a bit and it for someone creative, which it sounds like you are, that's got to be an enjoyable part of the job where you get to put your little spin on things that in the
yeah,
that's got to make you feel good.
oh yeah, for sure. I think everyone enjoys having some creative expression in what they do, and there's definitely a lot of room for that in this project.
And so, with that all being said, I do want to state that their Kickstarter is still going. Link is down in the description. There's about, I believe, 7 days left to the Kickstarter from the date that this video is going to go out. So go check it out. See if it's something you can back. Johnny, I want to thank you for your time. It was very great game. The work that you get to put into the game and how it's done and the knowledge you bring to this.
No, I appreciate your time. It's been fun, and we'll catch you on Discord, right?
Yeah, definitely. Hope to see you in the game playing around with us in tests sometime.
Oh no, I'm usually lurking in there somewhere.
Lurking in there somewhere. You're probably just seeing how we're using your particle effects and what we're doing, and I mean, Dave, it's easy to tell when he's in the Discord server because when we do
Yep.
something and he's had a done some work on something, you hear Dave laugh.
Yeah,
And he has
he
this
does.
very ominous laugh. One last question I have for you. Do you ever catch yourself laughing and enjoying what you're seeing players do with some of the work?
With some of the work that I've done, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say I must have, but I'm coming up blank right now. I know that with the recent Skies update, just seeing all the positive reaction to that was really great. It actually put a smile on my face. So not an outright laugh, but I think that's pretty close.
Okay, you bring up the skies. That work
Yep.
is amazing. I love the skies and like fog effects, sun rising and setting, and the moon having a bit of lighting there. And did you have anything to do with the layering effect where the planets sort of bypass each other and one goes behind another?
No, that is a separate tool. Yeah. Um,
But some of your work's in there because like when I see the moon go behind another planet or the sun go behind another planet, it affects the lighting. Because you've worked on some of the lighting, some of your work is in there with that
well,
effect.
sure. I set up the lighting, but like the moon orbits around the planet
Hmm.
on its own. And then you have the rings and the other planets, and that's a separate thing that's also happening and kind of orbiting on their own.
Yeah,
That specific part is what I did not work on.
yeah.
It was a matter of time.
It's all
Uh,
teamwork. A bunch of people
yep,
working to bring that one effect together, which when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is so cool. This is so nice seeing it. It makes once again the world feel alive. It immersed me and I sat there for like 30 minutes just watching this guy clouds move separately from um night sky, the different planets moving at different times, stuff like that, and one going behind another, the different asteroid effects, like the cold asteroids, the hot asteroids, the hail asteroids, and the big asteroids, and the anti-gravium asteroids. Just watching them fall is really nice, and
yep,
then the different effects that they have on the ground all brings it together. You had your hand bits of those because of like the particle effects for the asteroids fall. Your
sure.
your hand
And
was in that.
oh yeah, yeah, sure. But what's kind of really amazing about the game is that all those different types of asteroids falling and creating chaos on the ground. Um, like that was relatively simple to put together because of the way our system is built, and and because our planets are simulated. Everything you see when the impact happens, it's just like part of the simulation. That's like one of the really cool parts about this game. Like we didn't really have to do like anything special to make the interaction of the asteroids and the planet happen. Uh, yeah, the engine can do a lot,
Yes, it
and,
can.
and
Does
we're
it does amazingly fun things.
yeah,
I'm really enjoying it. So we're out of time, but once again,
yep,
thank you for your time. It's really fun chatting with you and getting to know the work that you put into.
yeah. It's been fun.
Yeah, everyone have a great
Okay, see you then.